So this video, while already being way outside the scope of my channel, is also way over-delayed because I'm really bad at speaking coherently, and watching a certain person's videos has made me wary of MMD-style animated vlogs. I'm gonna do it anyway, so please bear with me. Also, mild spoiler alert for Mirai Nikki, Gakkou Gurashi, Love Love, Little Busters, and major spoiler alert for Doki Doki Literature Club. A few months ago, I discovered BreadBox, a channel that seems to primarily analyze Vocaloid songs and producers. And honestly, it's everything I never knew I needed. I totally suggest that you subscribe. Don't we all remember the hours we spent scrutinizing each song, trying to figure out what they meant? No? Just me? Okay.
Okay.
But finding BreadBox was like finding a kindred soul who felt the same way about Vocaloid that I did, but could also put it beautifully into words. However, remember when I said that BreadBox primarily discusses Vocaloid? This video is what I meant. I watched it with an open mind, ready to accept criticism, and at the end I began to type out a response. But I had so many things to say, I figured that a paragraph and a comment wouldn't cut it, so while I'm still trying to figure out how to slow down and not slur my words when I speak, I hope that I can still provide a clear response and open up a fair discussion. I do want to preface things with a couple of things, however. First of all, the only other visual novel I've played to completion is Hatoful Boyfriend. I tried Clannad, but couldn't get very far for a number of reasons. The anime is still great. I don't think this makes me any less qualified to analyze DDLC, but I guess that's for you to decide. Also, at one point in his video, BreadBox said that DDLC had become the modern face of visual novels. I want to assure everyone and say that this is hardly the case. I'll explain more later. Like I said, I went into BreadBox's video ready to accept all his criticisms. Unfortunately, I believe that the video is riddled with two main misconceptions that led him to misinterpret the entire game. And that's no fault of his. Given the games he compared DDLC to, I'm not surprised that he was expecting more than what he got. Either way, I want to try and defend the game that I've spent so many hours of my life analyzing and discussing. So now comes the part where I try to clear up those misconceptions. As aforementioned, those misconceptions can be split into two main categories, the false reality versus the true reality, and the game being about depression. I could also talk about what makes DDLC amazing as a horror game, but this video's already going to be super long, and others have already talked about it, so I'm going to give you the links to those videos in the description. Whew! Long intro. Let's just get started. So first we're going to talk about the false versus true reality. BreadBox interprets DDLC to be like Gakkou Gurashi, meaning that all of Act 1 is a false reality, and Act 2 onwards is the true reality. But that's not it at all. If I had to compare it to anything, I'd probably pick Mirai Nikki, in which Yuno abandons the first world in order to go back in time and try to change the outcome of the survival game, thus creating the second world. Basically, the world you see in Act 1 is the true reality. That is how the game is supposed to be, before MONIKA changes it and creates the false reality. Because of this, BreadBox's argument that the true versus false reality aspect of the game takes away any uniquity that DDLC may have is undermined. I would go so far as to say that DDLC's story is hardly what makes it unique. What's unique about the game is its mechanics. Where will you find a game that requires you to dig into the game's files to directly progress with the storyline? The only two games I can think of off the top of my head that do this are One Shot and Mirror Layers. As far as I know, DDLC is the first visual novel to do this. If that's not unique, I don't know what is. Another thing that makes it unique is in how well hidden the twist is. I took some time to look into the marketing for the visual novels that BreadBox compares DDLC to, Love Love and Little Busters. Love Love makes absolutely no effort to hide the twist, spoiling it immediately in the game's description, and Little Busters was spoiled as soon as I looked at the game's Steam reviews. In the first couple months of DDLC's release, Team Salvata was able to completely hide every aspect of DDLC's twist, which is what made it so shocking to many people. The only hint we are given outside of the game is that MONIKA narrates the game's description, and she ends it by asking, "Will you promise to spend the most time with me?" This is a direct reference to MONIKA's desire to claim the player as her boyfriend, and she literally deletes her reality in order to accomplish this. In conjunction with this, the game's fanbase took great pains to hide the game's contents from people, urging them to play it first. Besides some cryptic hints, the Steam reviews spoiled nothing, and every video on DDLC always began with major spoilers ahead. Play the game first!
Before I dive into the plot and gameplay and start talking about spoilers, I would highly recommend you head over to the developer's website, download this game, and give it a try for yourself. If you love visual novels, or even if you hate anime with a passion, this game is truly worth your time, I promise.
Even now, it is against the game's fanbase guidelines to make a mod or fan game without first giving the player a link to the original game in case they haven't played it yet. Because of this, many people were given an extremely startling experience that made it just a little bit more special than the twists of other visual novels. I want to address BreadBox's other complaints regarding Act 1 while we're on the subject, however. Since the characters in Act 1 besides Sayori are not given sufficient time to develop, he claims that they are very shallow and lacking depth, but that criticism is partly why DDLC exists. Dan Salvato states that the game is a satirical love letter to visual novels, praising what he loves about them, while also criticizing what he sees in most Western visual novels. Lots of them are created by weeaboos who have very little understanding of Japanese culture and fail to write well-developed characters, focusing only on what cute personality archetype will get its readers off. To parody this, in the game's true reality, the characters are all very underdeveloped, with little to no depth. Yuri Natsuki's poems, however, do imply that they have experience with being bullied, and obviously Sayori's poem Bottles hints at her depression. MONIKA even directly criticizes this in Act 3, almost attacking the player by asking why they would ever like such shallow characters, with no personality and oversaturated cuteness. However, this makes her a bit of a hypocrite. Her insanity made her corrupt the game way too early to give Yuri and Natsuki's characters a chance to develop at all. That, and the game is supposed to be short, but more on that later. Speaking of which, remember when I said that DDLC has not become the face of visual novels? That's because DDLC is a meta-commentary of visual novels. If you wanted someone to start reading visual novels, would you really start them off with DDLC? It requires a basic understanding of anime tropes for context so that the game can criticize those tropes through satire. When I think of traditional visual novels, I definitely think of Clannad and even Ace Attorney before I think of DDLC. I just don't think it counts. BreadBox's next point that I want to address is how the game is made up of riddled falsehoods. Yuri and Natsuki's actions are not their own, as they are influenced by MONIKA, and that in itself might be a falsehood, as the game's subtext implies that MONIKA had no control over her actions. And he's absolutely right, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Just try to frame it differently. It's easy to say that the characters should have responsibility for their actions, but there's still a place where that blame belongs. Some of it actually does belong to those characters because MONIKA didn't directly change them, she only exaggerated what was already there. I'll talk about Yuri particularly to express this part. In Act 2, Yuri is extremely obsessive and stalkerish, keeping MC to herself and cutting herself for sexual pleasure. However, these traits were already present in Act 1, mainly in the Yuri date scene. Yuri arrives at your house before you do, whereas in the Natsuki date, some time passes before she arrives on schedule. But it doesn't end there. Of course, Yuri is seen hastily rolling down her sleeve, either about to cut herself or inspecting her past scars, and we can all agree that the scene where she sucks on MC's finger is weird. But what I want to talk about is the jasmine oil vapor that she brings with her. She says that it has relaxing effects, but that it also heightens emotions and increases heart rate. Yes, that's right. Yuri put an aphrodisiac in your room. An aphrodisiac is something, a food, drink, drug, in this case a scent, that stimulates sexual desire, and Yuri has known MC for how long? After examining this scene closely, it's no wonder that she goes haywire in Act 2. Everything she did was already within her, lying dormant, same with Natsuki. Actually, I'll give BreadBox points with Natsuki, even Dan Salvato himself was disappointed with the lack of time given to developing her character. Back to my point about responsibility, yes, some of it lies with Yuri and Natsuki, but the majority of the blame does lie with MONIKA, who manipulated their files and made them extremely unlikable to the player, torturing everyone she's ever loved, including the player, in the process. So, if you want, rather than viewing Yuri and Natsuki as characters with no responsibility, you could view them as victims of MONIKA's unfortunate insanity. If you'd want to go even deeper, then MONIKA is a victim as well. She was unfairly thrusted into the role of the tutorial player, despite being the most accomplished character in the game, captain of the debate team, popular, athletic, beautiful, intelligent, etc. She would never amount to anything more significant than a side character. Along with that, she discovered that everything she'd ever known, her childhood memories, her family, her school, and even her friends in the literature club, were all fake constructs meant to act as entertainment for a higher being. Despite claiming that she is the only real thing about the game, she knows deep down that she is as fake as everything else and desperately fights against it. But who thrust her into this role? Who was sadistic enough to give her this self-awareness? None other than the game's creator, Dan Salvato. I'd even go as far as to say that he could be considered a character in the game. His letter is present at the end of the game's true end, and MONIKA even addresses him as her universe's god in one of my personal favorite bits of dialogue in the game. This turns the character's lack of responsibility into something much more tragic than might have originally been seen. That's everything I wanted to say about the false versus true reality, so now we'll go on to the next category. The game is about depression. Sorry, but that simply isn't true. As stated before, DDLC is little more than a love letter to visual novels. It's a satirical parody of everything that Dan hates about Western visual novels, while at the same time a celebration of everything that he loves about the visual novel genre, and that is how visual novels are a unique medium that uses visual and audio atmosphere and interactivity to drive a well-told story. Dan even celebrates CG hunting. In order to get the game's happy ending, the game is required to abuse the save load feature in Act 1 and get a total of 9 CG images, 3 for each girl. The game does have a secondary purpose outside of being a love letter, but it's nothing glamorous. DDLC is actually a hype game for Team Salvato's next game. That's why it's so short. It's an introduction to their work and wasn't meant to get as popular as it did. This is why the game's files are riddled with hints about Project Libitna, which may, or admittedly may not be, related to Dan's next game. BreadBox was simply looking for depth and meaning that just wasn't there. And again, given the type of visual novel that he seems to be used to, I'm not at all surprised. In fact, I'm sorry that he was disappointed with DDLC. But that isn't to say that the game has nothing to say about depression. However, the game's only characters who are afflicted with it are Sayori and possibly MONIKA. And no, Sayori's depression is not something fake that MONIKA created. Sayori herself states that she's had depression for a really long time. This, paired with the Bottles poem, is proof enough that Sayori's depression is her own. However, it is of course MONIKA's fault that it got as bad as it did, eventually leading to Sayori's suicide. Actually, let's talk about Sayori for a second. Dan states that he wanted to emulate the struggles that his own friends with depression often described, and personally, I felt that he captured it perfectly. Sayori is a character that people can empathize with, and the fact that she was inspired by real people makes her struggles all that more meaningful. It tells depressed players that they are not alone, something that BreadBox regularly praises Vocaloid for. As great as this all is, it is unfortunately just a side point, still an important one, and MONIKA's hand in it doesn't undermine anything at all. In fact, she adds to it. MONIKA's own insanity has a lot of depressive elements to it. She feels out of control, not as important as her friends or the MC, a plaything. This sunk her into a deep depression that she fought savagely against, turning to the player as the only way to escape her fate. Because of this, she ended up torturing and even killing all of her friends, something that she eventually comes to severely regret. I don't know what that says about depression. I'm hesitant to say that it might show how one's own suffering may cause pain for others, because the vast majority of people with depression seek to help people rather than harm them. Something that Sayori is nearly obsessed with, actually. My point is that MONIKA does not undermine Sayori's depression at all. But the other characters have nothing to say about depression whatsoever. Natsuki, if anything, is more likely to be suffering from trauma due to the abuse she faces at home from her father and her fear of being ostracized at school. Yuri has been bullied in the past, and this has left her with a very low sense of self-esteem, but I wouldn't say that she necessarily suffers from depression. She doesn't cut herself because she hates herself. She cuts herself because it sexually stimulates her. Her suicide in Act 2 is also not a result of depression, and can be interpreted in 2 different ways depending on how the player responds to her confession. If the player rejects her, then Yuri kills herself because she cannot accept a world in which MC won't love her. If the player accepts, however, she kills herself in an attempt to gain an ultimate sexual experience. She finds pain satisfying, and while riding on the high of her confession being accepted, a painful death would probably make her the happiest girl in the world. Just look at her face. Does that look like the face of a depressed person? No, it's a freaking ahegao, and that word you can Google for yourself. Point standing, Yuri has nothing to contribute to the game's minor themes of depression, so her death doesn't taint it at all. A bit exaggerated for the sake of shock value, maybe, but it doesn't actually hurt the story. That's everything I wanted to say about BreadBox's video. I'm not exactly expecting a response, I just hope that he doesn't hate me. DDLC has come to mean a lot to me, so I wanted to defend it. That, and I just love talking about it. I hope I was able to clear some things up, and that I spoke clearly enough. And now, since I'm really bad at ending videos, I'm just gonna... Hey, Miku?
Hi.
You know, I love Doki Doki Literature Club, but I always felt like something was missing, am I right? Like we just didn't have enough time.
Hey. Nani kore?
Well, Miku, I'm glad you asked. Doki Doki Waifu Club is an upcoming mod that gives you a second chance. You get to hang out with all your favorite characters in the Literature Club one more time.
どうしてこれをインストールしなきゃいけないか?
Well, obviously, it's because you get a new story, a new soundtrack, a new minigame, and beautiful new CGs to collect. So follow Doki Doki Waifu Club on Twitter, and if you're really interested, join the Discord server where you can talk to me and the other people working on the mod. See you there!